get started though. My name is Christy Angerhofer. I'm from the University of Colorado School of Medicine. And
I'm Tungar. I'm one of the associate program directors for the residency at Denver Health.
And we're here today to talk about a process that we implemented at Denver Health on holistic review. It's not the only way to do holistic review, but it is the way that we kind of sat through our process and really tried to create a how-to guide. So we're going to walk you through this today. We don't have any disclosures. And our objectives today are going to be to define holistic review as described by the AAMC with the experience, attributes, and metrics model, which is the EAM model. You're going to hear that a lot today. We're going to discuss the importance of aligning our recruitment with our institutional and program hospital missions. We're going to outline steps necessary towards successful implementation of holistic review and your whole recruitment process, and then identify barriers to successfully implement this into your processes, and talk about some barriers that we faced and how we overcame them. So we start with this quote, that structural racism in academia and academic medicine is destructive to science and society. To deny its existence is to fertilize the soil in which it thrives. Uprooting it demands, at the very least, a fundamental transformation in institutional education, policies, practices, and resource allocation with sustained anti-racist actions. And we start with this because, we are a program that really prided ourselves in doing DE&I work for probably upwards of 10 years. And if you would have asked us if we were doing holistic review, we would have said yes, that we were already doing it. We looked at the full application. But what we realized was we weren't really seeing any different results. And so we had to kind of look at our system, see what it looked like, and make some big changes to it to kind of transform what we were doing. So we know the numbers that we have a physician body that is not representative of our country. So we need to kind of keep working towards gaining those numbers and making them bigger. And when we think about the benefits that you get for your program when you increase your diversity, that can be improved innovation, improved pipeline efforts, enhanced retention, the reduction of health care disparities. And when we really thought about why we were doing this, it always came back to the patients. We want health equity, we want to work towards that, and that's really our biggest goal. When we think about that health equity and the patients that are being served at our institution, we wanted to increase the trust, the satisfaction, the comprehension on the medical level, the chronic disease management, and the follow-up. There's a lot of studies that show that when you have this diverse environment, there are improved communications between that patient and the physician, with all physicians, not just the physicians that are from an underrepresented background. And so again, getting to that health equity, we wanted to know our why. Additionally, the ACGME tells us that we must do this, that we must engage in these practices and be kind of forward-thinking and forward-moving in increasing the diversity and inclusion within our programs. So when we first started talking about this, we had to have this discussion. Are all of our applicants coming to us from the same background, from the same even playing field? And I think as we know, and we have discovered through systemic racism and oppression, that that's not the case for everybody. So recognizing that, owning it, and talking about it openly was a really good first step. The next step for us was sitting down and thinking, okay, so maybe we do it on the interview side, or maybe we do it on the screening side, but are we incorporating these thoughts and beliefs and programmatic issues into all of our processes? And we realized that we needed to make sure in the screening, interview, and selection process that we were that we were thinking about holistic review in all of those. And so we're going to start with the screening process. So holistic review from the AAMC tells us that we need to refer to our mission-aligned selection process, so really starting with that mission, and then really look at the applicants as a whole in terms of their experience, attributes, and metrics, as well as the value that that person would bring by coming into your program. This selection criteria is broad, and so we want to make sure we weren't missing anything. When we looked into some data about places that had done holistic review, we found this massive study that looked at a lot of graduate programs who had implemented holistic review, and what they found was that they increased their diversity not only in race, ethnicity, and gender, but also in experience, socioeconomic status, and perspective. and that they didn't change their GPA of their incoming classes, their standardized test scores, or their graduation rates. So there's often this idea that if you increase your diversity, you're going to have these subpar candidates or subpar things, and it's really, there's no value in that. That's not true. And so we wanted to have that data as we were entering in this process. And this was really our mantra going through this, and this is from the UCSF handbook, that valuing diversity should not be considered giving special consideration to a person because they are from a certain group or identity, that the diverse and individual perspective, experience, and language that the individual brings as part of their identity should be viewed as a skill that is valuable and sought out in departments and programs. And this, again, is really important to say, what are we missing? What perspectives are we missing? And people's lived experience, they bring their whole selves with them to our programs, and we need that. We need those perspectives, and we need all of those ideas. Thank you so much. So again, we looked at the holistic process in AAMC, and we said, have we defined our mission? Have we defined our values? And I think we have. We are Denver Health. We are a safety net hospital. We care for the underserved. We really wanted people that were mission-driven, that cared about our population, that wanted to give back, that wanted to be a part of the community of Denver. And so we had to recognize that, kind of put it on paper, and make sure that everyone knew that those were our missions. The next thing we had to think about is, what are those experiences, attributes, and metrics that we could find in applicants that would kind of feed into that mission that we had so well defined? And were we actually doing that in our processes? And thinking about diversity, was it our North Star? Was it a part of our mission truly to make sure that our patients did have representation? And again, this is just a chart from UCSF that they have one of these for every one of their departments. And I think naming that, owning it, and always being able to refer back to, hey, this is our mission, it's part of what we're doing, is really important. So in thinking about what are those experiences, attributes, and metrics, what do those mean? When you think about experience, that can be anything from volunteering to where you grew up in maybe a rural background or a different country. It could be things that you've done, Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, other things. When you think about attributes, that can include somebody's gender identity, their race, their ethnicity, their parental status, if they had worked before coming to medical school. All of those type of things can be attributes. And then the metrics we're really familiar with. These are the standardized test scores, the MSPEs, the graded clerkship scores. So those are all of our kind of fundamental metrics. And as we were going through this process, we were like, what are we doing and what are we not doing? And so we wanted to make sure that holistic review in our process, we weren't making up for previous injustices. We cannot fix historical oppression. That's not kind of our goal right now in this scenario. We just don't have the ability to do that. We didn't want to lower standards or have the appearance of lowering standards. And we didn't want to just make holistic review for one group of people. We wanted to make a process that could be a process that went into every single one of our applicants. What we wanted to make sure we did was have a system to consider all of the applicants, including their perspective, their metrics, and everything, and not just focus on the metrics. We wanted a tool to widen our lens that was, pretty small at the time. We wanted a systematic and equitable process. And we knew that there was data that supported that looking for these characteristics that aligned with our mission would actually kind of give us the applicants that we really were seeking out. And so the next hurdle we found was that ARIS doesn't set you up for holistic review. There is no attributes button. There is no, there's kind of an experience place, but you really have to seek this data out. And so we had to kind of dig into those personal statements, the letters of recommendation, the volunteer experiences. In addition, the dean's letter has a lot of great stuff in the opening comments and the concluding paragraphs that tells you a little bit more about the highlights of that individual. And a result that we hoped to get was to recruit individuals whose AEM, their attributes, experience, and metrics, were aligned not only with the ACGME core competencies, but also with our program's mission, vision, and values. And we're hoping to recruit a diverse class of individuals that can represent our country and our patients. And so I'm going to pass it to Dr. Sungar.
So
We hope that gives a bit of a baseline foundation of what holistic review is. And Christy and I have been fortunate enough to be to a number of talks about holistic review and to kind of understand this framework. But when we were doing this work maybe 2 years ago, we were sitting in Christy's backyard and we didn't know where to go from here, right? So we know what this is, but how do we implement it into our own program? What does that look like? And so that's the pragmatic component of this talk, is that we're gonna view our experience as kind of a case study and just walk through what we did to get the changes that were implemented. I think it's very important to know, and Christy hinted at this, holistic review is an extremely personal process, right? It is tailored for each program. So what we did was a successful implementation, we feel, for our program, but it will not mean that you can use that same exact kind of playbook for your own programs. I do think that some of the steps will be illustrative and important. And then there are a lot of ways to do this work well. This is one example. It's not to say that it's the right example, but hopefully this may give those of you who are considering or refining this process within your own institutions some tips and thoughts about how to actually proceed once the will is there. So kind of a rough understanding of the steps we went through to fully implement this into our screening process was kind of step one, and this is very clear in the principles of holistic review, is kind of anchoring to mission. So we have to define our mission. We have to know what we value. Identify our current state. So what are we currently, where were we when we started this work? What was our distribution across that, experiences, attributes, and metrics? What's the gap analysis? How do we get to where we want to be? How do we ultimately do the work to balance that rubric across the experiences, attributes, and metrics? How do we implement it? How do we monitor to make sure that it's working? And then overcoming barriers is an important step. And so we'll kind of talk through each of these in order. I think similar to like Kern's model, right, in medical education, this is not a sequential process. This is iterative, so I'll spare you the pentagram, but each one of these steps kind of informs and refers to the other steps. So I think it's probably presented more simply than it actually is here. So first of all is mission, and we talk about holistic review as a tool for increasing the diversity in your program, and that is absolutely true, right? A fundamental principle of holistic review is that diversity is essential to excellence. And so the most important thing is that you have to have consensus on that point, or you can't do any of this work. So that's a huge requirement. And oftentimes that's going to be a huge investment to get you to the point where you can even consider doing this. That investment needs to occur not just within your programs, whatever they are, but probably within your departments, hopefully within your institutions more broadly. And then once you've made that agreement that diversity is essential to excellence, the question is, what is your program value? What do you want? What is your mission? And then who are the people who can help you achieve that mission? And that's the applicants you're going to try to find. I think, holistic review is a tool that can be pointed at anything, right? We're a county program, as Christy said. We were looking for people who had experience or commitment to health equity work. But just as reasonably, you could use holistic review if you were trying to increase the number of researchers in your program and you were using this to increase the value of MD, PhD candidates, right? So define your mission and then figure out what you value and then ascribe value to what you value. And that's really the step here at the beginning is to know what you're looking for. I think Christy alluded to this. For a long time, for a decade, we've been trying to increase the diversity of our program. We've cared about health equity. And yet, as you'll see as we dig into how we were screening applicants, there was no place in our rubric where we were able to put that value, right? So we talked about it at interviews all the time. We'd talk about it at our rank meeting. We'd say, well, this person has done all this health equity work and they'd be great. But there was no ability to actually elevate their objective score until we made these changes. And that's a lot of the work that we did that we'll walk through. So once you've defined your mission, you're going to identify your current state. We're a relatively large program, and I know this is different for variably sized programs, but we get about 1,400 applications each year, so we have a group of graders. So with that requirement, we've built a document that is our grading rubric, and that has existed for a number of years, right, to try to standardize the process by which we grade. So the first thing we did was sit down and say, what does our rubric look like? and how would we assign each of the points we give to this experiences, attributes, and metrics framework that holistic review provides. And so we went through and we did our best guess. To be fair, there is some overlap here, particularly where experiences and attributes can sometimes blend. But we did our best to say, these point values that we assign to an application correlate to this level of the experiences, attributes, and metrics. So this is our score. We're just looking at the paper score, so we're just going to flip to the next slide, which will be 100% representation of that paper score. But you can see, we thought we were doing holistic review. We were touching every part of the ARIS application. We were reading every word of personal statements, and yet 80% of the value that we were ascribing to select applicants to interview in our program was metrics-based, right? So we weren't balanced. We were particularly poor at appreciating the attributes of our applicants. And so the next thing we did is we tried to find balance. And so Christy and I sat in her backyard for hours and hours and hours, and we kind of brainstormed and referred back always to that mission. What is our goal of our program? What are our missions? And who's going to help us achieve that mission? So we developed a new rubric. We tried to, again, classify each of the components back to that experience, attributes, and metrics framework. And we found some balance, right? We weren't perfect by any means, but we made a significant improvement in decreasing the weight we ascribed to metrics, increasing the weight we ascribed to attributes, and we made a modest benefit where it comes to experiences. And so we're going to dig into this a little bit more and try to find where we found these changes. So the first thing we realized right off the bat when we looked at that pre-state, right, where we were, was we were way too reliant on metrics. And so how do we decrease the value that we ascribe there? And the first thing we did is we can see in our previous state, we held a lot of value in the USMLE score. And so we got rid of any value associated with the USMLE score. I want to be completely transparent. We maintained what is a pretty low threshold level. So applicants had to meet that threshold to be considered. That being said, all of our underrepresented applicants, our applicants from underrepresented backgrounds, had a full review of their application regardless of their USMLE score. But what we really thought about was, do we care if someone got a 215 on their step one or a 270? And the answer was no. And that is a personal choice, but I would also argue for those of you who are tightly holding on to USMLE scores that there's a lot of data that does not support probably the value that many of us historically have placed or continue to place, right? We know that in emergency medicine, a score greater than 227 predicts you will pass your boards, but it has very little ability to predict how successful you will be in residency or beyond that. And again, that differentiation between a 227 and a 270, we don't know what that means. What I can tell you anecdotally is, and we'll get to this in a little bit, we'll refer to it again, but interviews since we've made this change have been way more pleasant. Interview days, we are talking to people who connect with us, right? We share a common goal, value. In the past, oftentimes we would be interviewing people and there was just no connection, but they got a 275 on their step one. And that's what got them to our interview day. But it was a waste of time for both of us, right? It was both a waste of time for us as the interviewers, and it was a waste of time for those applicants who did not connect with our program. And honestly, regardless of their ability to take a standardized test, may not have any ability to succeed within our program or be happy within our program because of that inability to align with our mission. So we axed the value we ascribed to the USMLE score, and that was a large component of decreasing our reliance on metrics. In addition to that, we kind of shaved off the weight ascribed to a handful of other metrics. And then we talked about our kind of very poor performance in appreciating the attributes of our applicants in our pre-state. And so we tried to do a lot of work on this and think about how we would do this. And what we did is we added 2 new components to our rubric. And I'll actually pull these up. So we named them, for lack of better terms, kind of a mission score and a perspective score. And so the mission score was really just binary, yes or no. Does this applicant have a history of work in health equity, altruism, commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, right? These are core tenets that are essential to our mission at Denver Health. And it's just a yes or no. And then from a perspective point of view, we basically asked ourselves, will this person add to the diversity of our program? And that was both kind of race and ethnicity, but also gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, first generation, some geographical even, right? Who are we missing? Whose voices are we missing in our program? And how can we elevate them in our screening process? I think when we talk about perspective, it's important to talk a little bit about the AAMC definition. So traditional AAMC definitions of underrepresented was just based on race and ethnicity. And it was kind of 4 main groups. It was Native Americans, Alaskan, Pacific Islander, Hawaiians, Black and African American, and Hispanic and Latinx. The AAMC has since revised the definition of underrepresented, and so that was kind of how we informed that perspective score, right? So now underrepresented is essentially any group that is not well represented in your population. And I think oftentimes we wonder what the goal is. For us, we've kind of set our North Star in terms of the demographics we're hoping to achieve in our program to our patient population. And so we know the patients who come into our hospital, and if we can mirror a physician workforce that is similar to the patients we're seeing, we feel that there is a lot of evidence that would support that would improve the care we deliver, the strength of our programs, et cetera. So that's kind of how we got there. Again, I think if you're going to do this work, trying to put it down in writing, trying to really quantify these things is important. And so then comes the execution. And so we have a 5-page document that is our screening rubric that is distributed to all of our reviewers. We have a training session at the beginning of every ARIS application cycle where we spend a half day. Reviewers review applications from the prior year. All of us review the same applications and try to find some level of agreement in terms of the scores we would provide. And we have the opportunity to discuss where variability may exist and ideally limit that. But I want to kind of use an example of the detail that we provide in our rubric to try to elucidate this experiences score. So experiences, I think, is hard. It's one of the areas where there's a lot of subjectivity. And so we kind of approached it in 2 ways. We asked applicants to just kind of create a running tally as they're looking through the entire ARIS folder. Again, this isn't you go to the experiences tab on ARIS and calculate the experience score, but you need to look at the personal statement. You need to look at the dean's letter. You need to look at the research experiences. And the idea is that you just have a tally. And if you were to look at my office during ARIS season, it's just pages, and it looks like I've been in prison for 3 years. It's like each day is etched off, and that's just pages and pages and pages as I'm trying to create these tallies. So we tried to maintain some objectivity, and we asked reviewers to look for kind of 2 things. So one is look for experiences that we feel are valuable to us. So we know that we've had residents who were successful in our program who did things like Peace Corps, who had leadership roles within their medical school. And so look for those experiences that are valuable, that we know we valued in the past, but also look for experiences that describe our applicants, right? So if you were the president of your LGBTQ med student advocacy group, that shows that you have leadership skills. It shows that you have advocacy skills. It shows a commitment to vulnerable populations. And so those are kind of attributes that speak to the experiences that you've had, or rather the experiences speak to those attributes. And so we tally these up, we generate a score. I recognize that this is still an area, I think, where we have a lot of subjectivity, but we try our best to create some uniformity across how we do this. I think the other point that we need to talk about in execution of this process was the messaging. So we spoke a little bit about that consensus that diversity is essential to excellence. That needs to be there from the beginning, and ideally it's there not just from your program, but from the leadership above you in whatever hierarchy in which you exist. But you need to connect that message to the mission of the institution. You need to be entirely unified in this because, as we'll see in a minute when we get to overcoming barriers, medicine has a lot of momentum. and particularly something like a USMLE score, right? You say we're no longer putting any weight in the USMLE score, and people will go bonkers. And so you have to have an answer to those questions, and you have to be unified in how you present that. And then, like, continuously repeating this message, and I can't reinforce this enough. Like, every day, every meeting, every time you interact with faculty and they ask questions about recruitment, the answer is, we've recommitted our goal of recruiting a diverse residency body for reasons that you can elucidate, right? For all the reasons we've talked about, but that message needs to be forefront every single day. And repeated and repeated and repeated until people get bored of hearing it so that they're on board and understand the process. Monitoring, I think monitoring is really important. We collect data on demographics from every stage of the application process, right? So what are the demographics of the group that applied to our program? What are the demographics of the groups that were invited for interview, who declined our interview, who actually interviewed, and then at each cut point of our rank list? And this gives the opportunity to make adjustment, but more importantly, it makes sure that you're not blind to this process, right? One of the principles of holistic review is if you're not screening for the applicants you want, you can't fix that on interview day, right? You can't find that applicant that you didn't offer an interview for and bring them in at the end of the process. And so this is true at every level. And so Christy likes to refer, like, looking for the leaks in our pipeline, right? Where are we losing applicants that we want, and checking it at every step to make sure. So results, we'll talk a little bit about the results for our program. This is just to kind of reinforce that this was effective for us. And again, when we talk about results, we always talk about holistic review, at least as it's presented here. This was a screening intervention, which means that it yields screening results, right? And so we'll go through some other interventions that you can use at other phases. But if we're really just looking at this, the impact of holistic review and screening applicants, we can look at invitations. So we compared the data for our program from the 5 years prior to this implementation to the past 2 years, where we've used this new rubric that incorporated these components of holistic review. And we looked at kind of what happened to our underrepresented applicants. In this definition of underrepresented, we stuck with that traditional definition by the AAMC. So just based on race and ethnicity, because ERIS is unfortunately really difficult to classify many of those other components. But it does have a self-identification, and so you can kind of create filters and analyze data based on that. So we can see that after implementing this, we had an almost twofold increase in the number of underrepresented applicants who were invited for interviews. We had a 50% increase in the number who interviewed, and then we had an almost doubling at almost every level of our rank list in terms of representation of applicants who historically are kind of excluded. I think some other things to look at this is the effect it had on the score. We can recognize that scores are relative, but I think this brings up the question, many of you have seen graphics like this, right? This idea of equality versus equity. So equality is giving everyone the same resource. Equity is giving everyone the resources they need to achieve a goal. And we can see all of the scores for all of our applicants increased with this new rubric. So kind of everyone benefited, but we can see that our underrepresented applicants benefited the most, in line with our mission to allow those applicants to rise higher in our rank list so that we could be more effective at bringing them into our program. Okay, we've hinted at this a couple times, overcoming barriers. I think this is a quote that it was not directed necessarily at us. We'll see some that were, but I think is like a standard mantra that you will hear when you try to do this work, right? Diversity would be nice, we believe, as long as it does not require trade-offs in more important factors, particularly academic achievement as measured by science grade and standardized test scores. And I will, try to withhold from laughing at this in the sense that, like, we wish we could be that good at predicting success, right? And so there are a lot of problems with test scores and traditional measures of academic success. But even discounting that, there's always this thought that diversity requires a sacrifice. And we have to recognize that that is very rarely, if ever, true, and arm ourselves with the information to be able to fight that within these programs. And we'll get to that in a second. But these are quotes that actually we heard. And these were quotes that were said by faculty and residents in meetings as we discussed this, right? And a couple examples. This year, our grading system puts white straight men at a disadvantage. Well, they already got extra points for diversity, right? And so again, the answer to every one of these questions is we have implemented a new process in line with our mission to have a more diverse residency body that is committed to health equity work, right? And that mantra is said over and over and over and over again. And I think as best you can to try to avoid the emotional response to this that I think can come, right? This year our grading system puts white straight men at a disadvantage. Yeah, it's about damn time is what I may want to say, but I will say, we're doing this in alignment with our mission to recruit a more diverse residency body who's committed to health equity, right? And so repeating that mantra, maintaining that mantra, and having consistency across all of your leadership committee. So Christy will now talk a little bit about other interventions that incorporate some of these principles of holistic review into the interview and screening process, and then we'll close with just a couple more kind of results.
All right, thank you. So again, when we were doing this work, we were like, we need to implement this in every way. We need to look at our rubrics. We need to look at our interview questions. We need to look at our interview anchors. We need to make sure that we're catching those biased languages and making inclusive days, because again, it's about the whole recruitment. And I'll reiterate what Gannon said about getting these applicants to the table. We would interview 300, 400 people a year, and you would talk so much about that health equity and their experiences in that interview, and we'd say, oh my gosh, we love them so much. But again, we weren't getting them to the table without that screening intervention, and I know we talked about that, but I just want to reiterate it because it's so important. And so these are some of the things that we kind of put into that mission. Do we all promote diversity, inclusion as a roadmap to excellence? We cannot be excellent. We just literally cannot do it if we are homogenous, so we have to change it. Do we have clarity about what those experience and attributes were? And we had to go through and kind of write that out. Does this count? Does this not count? What does substantial experience mean? What does true demonstrated mission and commitment to health equity look like? And try to spell that out as best we could. We had to do a lot of bias trainings. Dr. Jackie Ward Gaines, who's sitting right here, we did 3 sessions that were an hour and a half with every single person who interviewed and graded and was a part of the recruitment session, talking about our biases, having open conversations of what excellence looked like, what tools you can have to mitigate those biases as they came up. That was a really important part of this process, is to get everybody on the same page and get them talking, because we all have biases. We know that. And so just telling people and then teaching people and engaging with the group are 2 different things, and that was a really important process of this work. And then again, what are those common statements that we share with our applicants about health equity, about who we are? Were we all on the same page with that, or is one person saying, hey, we just want you to come work hard, or hey, we want you to publish all the time? Or were we all saying that like we cared about the same things? So getting people on the same page. In terms of errors, this is a question we get all the time when we give this lecture, is like, what do you blind and what do you not blind? And I'll be really transparent on this. If you are looking for more women or more non-binary people in your program, then you might not blind certain aspects of the application, because you need that data to do the holistic review. And so you don't want to blind the self-identification. But a picture, a name, those are things that make no difference on what kind of doctor a person's going to be, so you can blind those parts of it, because we know there's tons of papers out there that women with longer hair, men who wear bow ties, things like that, they make an inherent bias right off the bat when you see that picture, and may make you think that they are better fit for your program or not better fit. And so the picture gains no value. So taking those things away and not even allowing people to be able to see that in ERIS is a good first step. And then think about who are the people that are committed to this process. Get their voices in your process in every step of the way. Be aware of the minority tax. We don't want to take your 3 diverse residents and say you have to be at every interview day, we need your face to be there, and we need you on the website. That's not the right way to do it. And it might be a lot of white people that are very large and white that lead these efforts. And so get those people engaged in your process, have them as allies and advocates in this. In terms of interviews, give faculty the expectation to learn applicants' names and pronounce them correctly. Hi, my name is Christy Angerhofer. It's pronounced Christy Angerhofer. I don't like to be called Chris or Chrissy. I could be called Angerhofer. That took me 30 seconds to do, but it's a microaggression to consistently call somebody by the wrong name or say, ooh, your name's too hard to pronounce, so I will just call you X. And you'd be shocked at how much that happens to applicants. And if that's the way you're inviting them into your space, it's not gonna go well. So say things like this to your faculty. Look at your questions like we talked about. Ask them in the same order. Try to standardize them. You don't want to be robotic, but you want to make sure that you're not asking this set of questions to this person because they like the same beer that you have, and this set of questions to another person because you may not have anything in common with them. That's going to bring bias in as well. Score your people immediately. Don't talk to your friend about it. Don't let other people bias that initial reaction you had. Don't make assumptions about applicants. Oh, they don't want to come to a program like this because, oh, I don't think that they'll do well because they have kids. Oh, like those are all biased statements, and we do it all the time. We spend 15 minutes with them and decide all that they can offer and all that they can handle and all these things. Ask more questions. That's how you reduce that bias. Look for evidence in your feelings. Our feelings are biased. Just plain and simple, we like people like us. And if people are different, we generally have a harder time with that. And then we removed fit. It was one of our anchors. It was one of our interview things. There was actually a category that was fit of the program. And we removed that and changed it to health equity to mission. Fit is inherently biased. And we love this quote, that we must recognize that recruiting applicants with a high degree of fit may come at the expense of our ability to recruit diverse applicants, which by definition are not similar to us in at least some way. And that's where it is, right? Like we sit across from somebody and again, you're like me, I'm pretty great, I am doing well in this program, you should too. And when you open your world to these different perspectives and different people, like they're not gonna be like you. They might not have the same lived experiences as you, but that is the value that they bring. That is the exact thing that you're like, wow, we need this here. We also sat in front of conference with our residents and we talked about these things. We are in Colorado. We have a lot of biking and hiking and skiing and rock climbing. I was born there. I've never skied a day in my life. That is not what speaks to me. I like culture, I like plays, I like other things, and so we told our residents, hey, be cognizant of the conversations you're having with these applicants. Like, not everybody is coming here to ski. Maybe they really like our population. Maybe they want to do research. Maybe they want to do altitude research. You don't know. Don't make that assumption. Have situational awareness. If somebody's a little bit quieter, I mean, it's EM, right? You want to be big and fun and do all these things, but that's not everybody's personality. It's not something that's bad or should be looked at as somebody's quiet or maybe doesn't fit the typical prototype. And then asking our people to also be really honest. Like we're in Colorado. It is not the most diverse state in the world. We don't have the most diverse hospital faculty. And so like we need to be honest about these things and tell people what it's like to work and live in this city and not try to paint a picture that is not correct. And then we actually put a survey out to all of our residents and said, hey, if you are willing to be on call to talk about any of these things, if an applicant asks an interview, like let us know and we'll connect you. So letting them self-select into that. In terms of rank, sitting down at the very beginning and reaffirming those goals, doing that mantra again and again and again, and also telling people, hey, when you say something biased in this rank meeting, somebody's gonna call you out, and creating that culture of, hey, I think what you just said might be a little biased. It doesn't happen overnight, but the more and more you do this work, the more and more education you have around it, it becomes more natural. To the point where when that statement came up about we're favoring white men, another faculty said, well, it seems like we've been doing that for the last 30 years and maybe we should change things. I mean, that was not Gannon and not a program director. It was another faculty that was able to stand up, a white faculty, and state that when that comment was done. And so you're empowering other people in that way. Know your applicants, and this isn't just your minoritized applicants. These are the people that you want, that fit that mission goal, that are gonna help promote your mission in health equity. Know them inside and out, especially if they have something that could be concerning on that application, and you know that somebody's gonna bring it up about a failed test score or a failed failed clerkship grade, be ready to talk about it openly and honestly and saying, yes, maybe, but they bring all this other stuff as well. And this is why we invited them, and this is why we value them. Challenge remark about fit, ask the questions, are there biased comments in these evaluations that we're reviewing, in these dean's letters? We interviewed somebody that was the only black man in his entire residency, or his entire med school class. If you don't think that there's biased comments in his MSPE, you're crazy. And so talk about that, recognize it, be open about it. Don't compare them to other people. Oh, the people from this med school, or they are like this. That's just not right. And then think about where they are on that rank list, and as other people are advocating for people, make sure they're not drifting down and you're kind of putting them lower on that list. All right, we're going to jump back to results.
Okay, so we'll quickly just look at outcomes of this process as implemented within our program. This isn't kind of to prove that this works. I think more importantly, this is hopefully to offer some inspiration that you can see some change. So we've used this new process for 2 years. This is our composites that you would see on Twitter of our incoming residents, or our current interns and our incoming residents who will be with us shortly. And then we can also look at the composition just based on demographics of our program in the preceding 5 years and then the 2 years following. And we can see that the average number of underrepresented residents within our program prior to this implementation was a little less than 10% across the classes. And since this implementation, it's almost a quarter. So this has been an effective change. Now, when you look at our demographics of our hospital, we still have a lot more work to do, but we've made some progress. And so it's up to us to try to refine this and continue to push this progress. I think in addition to this, we talked about interview days being more enjoyable. And I love all of our residents, but we're also finding that we're getting our people, right? We get 1,400 applications, and we're finally finding people that really connect with our institution. I can't prove it yet, but I think we're gonna have happier residents, because it's hard to go to work every day, but if you're going to work for a place you believe in and a program you believe in, it's much easier than if you're going to work every day so you can be close to the mountains. And I think this is illustrated here, right? So almost 95% of our applicants over the past 2 years, or our matched residents, got that mission score. So somebody in our grading group felt that they had demonstrated a true passion and commitment to that health equity work, a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. 2/3 received that perspective score, meaning that they would bring something unique to our program that was otherwise lacking. And 60% had both. Notably, no applicants or no incoming residents had neither. And again, this isn't surprising, right? We built the system for these results, but it worked in that sense. And then, we talked about, well, what about sacrifice? 40% of our residents matched in the last 2 years met AOA criteria, and we can argue about that at a different time. A quarter were Gold Humanism Honor Society. Almost a quarter were first-generation college graduates, which was another thing that we put in that perspective score. And then to really drive home the lack of sacrifice, we can look at our USMLE scores. So prior to the implementation and post-implementation, we can see there's absolutely no change in step 1 score from when we cared about it a lot to when we didn't care about it at all. And so this is something that I might get tattooed on my back, because this comes up all the time, and this is my favorite piece of data that people are like, well, and you're just like, well, what are we arguing about, right? There's no difference. And so if you can generate this data, if you can have this is really important to be able to feed back to those potential skeptics in your institutions. So that was a lot of information. We have a couple minutes left if there are any questions, or we can let you all go on about your day. But thank you for your time and attention. Please.
Thank you very much for kind of explaining all this. This is my first experience with a really clear operationalized way of thinking about this. So thank you. I guess my next question is probably about next steps in terms of obviously the changes that you want to make within the system. But then I also think about
Yeah, that's a whole nother talk. But like a hugely important topic. And I think as I've evolved in this process, I think that was a thing that I used to say, like, oh, but have we created an environment to let these applicants be successful here? And we have a lot of work to do to continue to do that. And I think it's multifaceted. But I also think applicants have a choice to come to our program. And if we're honest and we're not tricking them, then they can choose to come and they can recognize that they may be part of a cultural change. And it may not always be comfortable, but that's the only way we're going to get there. So, now we look at our residency body, and our first and second year class are a quarter underrepresented, right? And that in itself will change the culture. Now, we need to make sure as residency leadership we're being supportive as best we can. But I think the worst thing you could do is say we should not bring them here because it's not safe, because that is kind of overly paternalistic and has no ability to change the future. I think we talk about this a lot. Christy does work across all the GME programs, and we have a couple programs who have done way better than we have in terms of recruiting diversity and are really struggling with that after effect, which is this a safe place for these applicants who have been underrepresented and who are not well represented at other levels of our hierarchy, right? Christy, do you have more to offer on that?
Yeah, I just think when we think about this, it's a part of our diversity and inclusion efforts across everything. And so another thing that we implemented is a 10-hour, 2-year repeating didactic curriculum around health equity and bias, which again, Jackie Ward-Gaines over here leads. And so we knew that when we're bringing people here, we also need to keep educating our current people, and it's not going to happen overnight. And I think another thing that we're implementing this year is a part of the mentor surveys, asking about microaggressions, identifying them, and having plans. Like, we're not going to fix the hospital systems. We cannot guarantee that people are not going to be continually systemically and systematically oppressed, because that's the world we live in. But we can be more forward thinking about what we are doing as a program to increase our diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout our hospitals, throughout our faculty basis, and asking our leaders to really take a charge in that and saying, like, this is not going to be accepted, and these are things that are happening. But it is you're not going to make a culture shift with bringing more Black and brown people into the program. It has to be a part of a bigger diversity, equity goal. And so I think, like, we constantly are like, okay, like, what does this feed into this? And how does this feed into this? And, oh, we missed this portion of it. And so I think those are our next steps. We have not been successful recruiting Black individuals to our program, and that's something that we have to kind of go back to the drawing board. And we actually went back and we looked at, where did we lose people? Are they not applying? Are they declining? What did we do? Like, how did we not do these things? And I think those are really, it's hard to do. It's hard to ask Gannon to pull data on that stuff, but we have to do it, because if we don't know where we're deficient, we can't kind of continue to grow. And so I would say, like, I've been doing this work for 10 years, and I always tell people, just keep trying and keep reading and keep being humbled every day by the process, and keep striving for that excellence, and not saying, okay, well, we did this, we're good, we don't need to do anything else. Like, we always have to do more. And that's on the national level, that's on every level. Like, we wrote another paper about, like, telling ERIS to give us the data about people and how they identify in their gender and their sexual orientation. These are things that we want to value, and we can't value it if the national databases don't kind of let us. And so these are things that I think we all need to fight for, that health equity, and learn from each other, and grow together, just in medicine in general, not just in our own programs. I don't know if that helps.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I like what you do with the bias training for the interviewers, and I think that some of the NRRP data shows how important the interview day actually is. So I'm just curious, if you mentioned that you have, like, standard interview questions. Were you doing that before this initiative or after? And if so, like, is there like, where do you draw from to getting
Yeah, I think in the past we had like kind of 4 different categories. We wanted to make sure we had humble people and people who we did have a fit category and people who were dedicated to EM. And so we did have those, and we had each interviewer take like a different one of those to make sure that everybody wasn't like, hey, do you want to work hard? Hey, do you want to work hard? That we were getting to different parts of an applicant. And through this process, what we did is look at those anchors and look at those questions. We did not have health equity questions built into that, which we did because, again, we were like, how do we know if we don't ask the question? And so we made them up, though. We didn't get them from anywhere. And we don't tell our graders that they have to follow that exactly. But we say, your job is to get to that humility. Here are some questions that you can get to. But again, our bigger process was looking, we had like A was this, and B was this, and C was this, and we found a lot of biased language, like articulate and fit and other things that we had been using for years. And I was like, ooh, we need to make sure that our anchors aren't perpetuating that bias. And having everybody taking the bias training, they could start to recognize those as well.
No, I think Christy also sells herself short a little bit. She lives in this world and is an expert on this. And so as a residency leadership, like, use your resources. So we did make up our own questions, but we also went to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and said, hey, will you look at this and make sure there's not bias in it? And so if you have institutional resources like that, engage them to help you refine this process to make sure there's not biased language in your anchors, in your questions, et cetera. Cool. Any other questions? All right, thank you all again for being here.